Well, good morning. Is this thing working? I don't think so. Is this? Okay. Are we working? Okay, can you all hear me? Andy, can you hear me back there? What can we do? Testing. You can hear now? Great. Okay, thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm Morton Blackwell, president of the Leadership Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. We live in interesting times, perhaps currently more interesting than usual. 52 years ago, Richard Nixon was running for re-election in 1972, and he organized 4 or 5 enormous Republican gatherings across the country to talk about aspects of winning elections. And as executive director, or former executive director of the College Republican National Committee, they invited me to speak at a big regional meeting for all the Northeast in Albany, New York. And I got into some trouble for something that I said, which I believed then and I believe now. And what I said that got me into trouble was that most college students are politically apathetic, but it is possible to organize anything on a college campus. If you ran a dirty dish rag up a flagpole on any college campus in America, somebody would salute. And if you understood how to organize students and had resources, you could get a big crowd out for the ceremony. We are seeing that analysis play out on campus right now. There are enormous amounts of time, talent, and money put into organizing leftist activity currently on campus. How it is all going to turn out, I don't know. The news is full of it, and conservative students are in communication with us here at the Leadership Institute, and there's going to be some, I trust, reasonably skilled counter activities, but the left right now is taking advantage of the fact that of all the segments of our society, students have the most powerful herd instincts. Students sensing that their fellow students are doing something feel compelled to do similarly. So that's the reality that we're facing, and I thought that would be an interesting thought to begin. I encourage you to live tweet today's events, and the hashtag should be on the screens here. In 2023, your Leadership Institute trained more than 31,000 conservatives at over 2,200 separate training programs, an immense effort. Since 1979, the Institute has trained over 290,000 activists, students, and leaders. You have before you at your table our schedule for programs in the coming month. I urge you to take a moment to review these schools and consider attending one or sending a friend to one of our trainings. If you are watching online, and many are, I urge you to visit our website at leadershipinstitute.org/training to see upcoming online and in-person trainings. My pleasure now to introduce to you Taylor Tade, who will offer an invocation and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Taylor is originally from Houston, Texas. She currently attends Texas State University, where she is majoring in political science and minoring in religious studies. Before coming to the Leadership Institute, Taylor was the president of the Young Conservatives of Texas, a fine organization I have worked with for decades. And she was vice president of Network of Enlightened Women on her campus. She was a chair on the executive board of her Turning Point USA chapter and a member of Students for Life. She was also a senator at large in student government at Texas State. In her free time, Taylor enjoys attending church, reading, and two-stepping. She is currently the Career Programs Training Coordinator here at the Leadership Institute. Taylor, will you step up here?
Please join me in saying the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil, for yours is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Now please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. And now Rick Tyler will come up and give us a brief programs report. He is director of our Campaign Leadership College at the Leadership Institute. He is also a thought-provoking political analyst for, get ready for this, MSNBC Cable News Network, where he offers a conservative perspective to unfolding political events. He's the author of a book, Steal Right, subtitled An Immigrant-Loving, Hybrid-Driving, Composting American Makes the Case for Conservatism. Rick is a speaker with the Macmillan Speakers Bureau. As a professional political strategist, he has helped hundreds of candidates prepare for campaigning for public office. He's co-founder of Foundry Strategies, a strategic communications firm specializing in helping candidates and campaigns hone their communication skills. He was national spokesman for U.S. Senator Ted Cruz's presidential campaign. In the 2012 election, he was a senior advisor and spokesman to the Winning Our Future PAC, a pro-Newt Gingrich organization, Super PAC. Before joining the PAC, he was a key member of Speaker Gingrich's team for over a decade, serving as his advisor and spokesperson. As lead trainer for GoPAC and trainer for the Leadership Institute, Rick has trained thousands of candidates, citizens, and public officials and their teams in the United States and in countries around the world, including Canada, Italy, Greece, Japan, Latvia, Estonia, and Israel, to lead successful campaigns for elected office. He's been invited to speak to many professional groups and committees and state legislative caucuses. A gifted communicator, Rick has appeared thousands of times on national television news shows, including MSNBC, Fox News Channel, CNN, CBS News, NBC News, ABC News, PBS, HBO, CNBC, CBN, Bloomberg News, BBC, CBC, RTE, and Al Jazeera. Rick?
Well, thank you, Morton. I know I'm in trouble when my bio is longer than my report is actually going to be. In defense of MSNBC News, I would just say you must go to where the sinners are. So So I want to talk about the CLC. Morton mentioned some of the countries that I've had the privilege of traveling and representing the Leadership Institute and offering training around the world. And I will tell you one complaint I hear, a refrain, over and over from all these countries, from South America to Asia, across Europe to the Middle East. There's one complaint. Why don't we have an LI in our own country to help us win? And we have an LI right here in Arlington, our headquarters, and that's where the CLC, the Campaign Leadership College, is based. I wanted to give you some statistics about the CLC and where we are. We have now graduated 367 people, which is just shy of our Leaders for America goal of 400, which we will meet in June. So we have 33 to go to reach our number of 400 campaign managers trained in this election cycle. That's out of a total of 709 applicants. Our acceptance rate is 52%. We'd like to take more, but our average class size is about 41. Of 41, 63% of those are male, and 38%, 7% are women. I think that's too low. I think women need to be closer to 50%. We are working on that. Our average age is 35 years old. About 44% of LI grads had taken an LI grad school before. More than half have not. So we're bringing a lot of new people into the LI family. What I'm most, I guess, one of the most things I'm proud about is our referral system. 56% of people who come to the CLC are actually referred by somebody else. We're not cold recruiting them. The rest we are. I'd love to get closer to 90% to 100% so that people are sending us people, and I think we'll get there. We are going to have our next CLC starting June 21st, but I'm also excited about December, where we'll have another Campaign Leadership College, and we're going to do it in combination with the candidate school and the comprehensive, or the candidate fundraising school. So those will happen concurrently, and we will do events together. So campaign managers get to be with candidates, and campaign managers get to be with fundraising people as well. So we're very excited about that. We're also doing that in conjunction with the IDU, the International Democracy Union. So it's going to be and we're doing our reunion for the CLC, our second year reunion, in December as well. So it's a very exciting and busy December. So we look forward to that, and I look forward to many opportunities to update and pass along our successes after this election cycle is over. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rick. This is an important program. You should understand this. The CLC that he's talking about is an intense, highly intense, 9-day training program, the longest training program that we've ever offered. And now I wanted to introduce our speaker, present to you Corey Gibbons, Director of Marketing and Events here at the Leadership Institute. Originally from Flint, Michigan, she moved to the Northern Virginia area 10 years ago to obtain her bachelor's degree. While at school, she interned for Generation Joshua, a conservative teen civics organization where she worked on several campaigns, such as Representative Jim Banks from Indiana. She also crafted Generation Joshua's Model UN program, which they still use today. After graduating with her bachelor's degree, she worked in marketing for several nonprofits, including parentsrights.org and CareNet, before starting at LI in the summer of last year. Corey has an Associate's of Applied Science and Dental Assistance from Mott Community College, a Bachelor of Arts in History from Patrick Henry College, and a Master's of Science in Marketing Project Management from Liberty University. In addition to accumulating degrees, Corey's other hobbies include reading fantasy novels, traveling, baking bread, hiking, singing opera, and making any type of yarn craft. Please come and introduce our featured speaker.
Thank you, Morton. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning, who just so happens to be a very good and close friend of mine. Joel Grewe started his life of debate at 6th grade. when he convinced his mother to homeschool him after working on the Capitol Hill for Congressman J.C. Watts in the House Republican Conference. He then spent time doing demographic research. He currently serves as the executive director of Homeschool Legal Defense Association Action, leading Generation Joshua, the HSLDA Federal Relations Initiative, and the HSLDA Online Academy. He served as the director of Generation Joshua for the past 15 years and is now a part of the HSLDA leadership team. Today, Joel travels the U.S. training homeschoolers, advocating for freedom, and mentoring young leaders. He draws on over 25 years of both ministry and political experience, having worked at HSLDA since 2007. Joel lives in Purcellville, Virginia with his wife, Christie, and their 3 children. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to our speaker this morning.
And out of respect for Corey, I will try to minimize the amount of stories I tell about her, but I have a lot of them. So it's really a pleasure to be here. I remember, I think the first time I was in this room was September 2007. The floors weren't as good, neither was the food. But I was sent because I was the oldest person in a group of people from Patrick Henry College and could drive the 15-passenger van. And at that point, LI was offering I believe it was the Future Candidate School, and it was a 6-week course where you come down for weekends, 1 day at a time. And that was my first time taking an LI course. I still use the lessons from that. Served me well when I got elected in my town. I didn't even have this on my bio, I'm sorry. I spent 4.5 years over COVID serving on our local town council, which was its own adventure. I've discovered local politics is my least favorite of the 3. I knew that going in, I still did it, and that was stupid, but it was what it was. But most of my time is spent working with home education. We do a variety of different things at HSLDA. If you're not familiar with home education, the broad strokes of it is that 50 years ago you couldn't find homeschooling. It didn't really exist. It was at best an anachronism in history for little places where people couldn't find some sort of structured education. But about 50 years ago, the beginning of the educational freedom movement began, and it began with homeschooling, where people looked at what was happening in modern education, which 50 years ago, modern education is a different thing entirely, and said, you know, I don't like where this is going, and I can do better for my kids. And so there were a couple options at that point. You had your traditional private schools, but as is today, those are expensive and occasionally cost prohibitive for people. So they said, what else could be done? And the answer was homeschooling. And homeschooling has grown from a, for lack of better terms, insurgent rebel educational movement, which is a really weird thing to say, to an enduring institution. Over the last 40 years, since 1983 to now, HSLDA and state organizations and groups across the United States have worked to make homeschooling legal and then to make it stable in all 50 states. That's a lot of work. And so we work at the federal level, we work at all 50 states, and we work internationally now. I think we work in every single country in the world potentially except Canada, because we built our own HSLDA there, kind of like you're doing with LI in other countries, and that is really helpful to have someone there that can handle their battles themselves. That aside, to do that requires a really interesting approach to how you do politics, because homeschooling is this odd combination of really conservative denim-wearing parents and hippies, okay? And those don't always get along well together, except for the fact that both of them agree the government does not know best. We can work with that. But it means we have a very interesting combination. Now, the majority of homeschoolers you're going to run into are on the conservative side of things, 80% plus. But there is a stripe that has always been on kind of, you get far enough around on the left side, working around, eventually you find some common ground with the right, okay? Neither side trusts government as the best arbiter and solutions for problems. And you know what? They're right. The government is very important and does certain things that are very important, but it is not the solution to all things. And particularly over the last 5 years, COVID to now, we have seen a change in modern society to where government is viewed proactively and persuasively as the answer to problems. Okay? That's not healthy for a society. Okay? It's not healthy for home education, it's not healthy for families. The government is a core aspect of society, but sometimes the most important thing it does is restrain itself. And in our role as citizens and as activists, we take the job often of reining the government's excesses back in. So I want to take a minute this morning and just walk through kind of 4 of the different ways that we at Homeschool Legal Defense Association work to build what we would consider healthy, productive, conservative policy when it comes to education. Now, I must admit, since I homeschool my own kids, I had to talk my mom into homeschooling me. She didn't want to. I said, please let me out. I will do anything. I will homeschool myself. Just let me out. She agreed tentatively, and then we did that until I graduated, as well as my brothers. In that process, we found there's certain things you can learn about how to do governance well, because you need to get elected, and LI talks about that a lot, but once you're elected, you have to govern well at the same time, and there should not be a lot of dissonance between what you're saying on the campaign trail and what you're doing in public office. You lose people's trust real fast. For homeschoolers, we try to make sure that the principles people are commonly familiar with in home education and our policy goals also make sense together. So if it sounds like I'm telling a lot of stories about kids, it's because I am. We work with homeschoolers and we tell stories to parents and about kids all the time. So apologies if this is a little bit of parenting, but you'll find some similarities in good governance and good parenting we've discovered. So, a couple things. Just for context, I have 3 boys, okay? They range from elementary to junior high. I have found one of the things that we have bonded over growing up is that we love to create things, okay? Most kids thoroughly enjoy imaginative play, okay? In fact, sometimes you learn more in imaginative play than you do in some sort of academic instruction in a classroom, okay? Because you have to take your ideas and put them into practice. For my boys, that might mean blanket forts, it might mean Legos, lots of so many Legos. It works as a home defense system too. And if you're doing it digitally, a lot of Minecraft, okay? Which, if you're familiar with it, it's basically digital Legos, okay? Where you can build stuff. My kids love doing it, and we love building entire worlds together, okay? Corey has seen my basement and the Legos, okay? They wrap down one hall and around, like one wall and around the next, okay? Which is about what I grew up with. At one point, my dad joked that I needed hip waders for the basement because of all the Legos, and he wasn't wrong, okay? But you learn stuff in doing that you don't get in a lot of other formats in life. But if you've ever done any sort of creative project that involves children, okay, when you start, things look like a Jackson Pollock painting. Actually, that's generous, okay? Jackson Pollock has more defined style and straight lines than most kids' initial building of anything, okay? It's chaos. There's colors and shapes going in every direction, designs that don't seem to make any sense and often will topple if you breathe at them, okay? That can be a lot of fun to play with. But as children mature, it becomes more than simple play, and at a certain point they start asking, or we start asking, is what we're building something that works? In fact, can we keep doing it in a way that's productive? And so at least at our house, we settled on 4 principles. First, if we're building something collectively, and it's more than just me and one of my kids, because community is hard for children, particularly for boys. Actually, it's just hard. And we settled on 4 principles, and they're simply this. Let me see if we can, does this actually, did I turn it on? I should turn it on. Let me see. Yes, no? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't work. Did I turn it off? I don't know. Whatever. Okay. Oh, that did something. Well, here are the house rules. Does it fit the larger idea? If someone's building something, okay, and the multiple kids are involved, is there kind of a master overarching plan, and is what you're building fit this, okay? Dinosaur cavalry riding in spaceships might work really fun in your little world, but it gets really crazy really fast, okay? Now, in games and stories, that can be rational or happily irrational. It doesn't work as much in government policy. We don't see that as much. But the concepts, we need to make sure that they actually synergize, okay? Does it interfere with the work someone else is already engaged in? If your brother is building this and you're building that and they're about to go into the same space, we're going to have a problem, right? So recognizing those interactions, does it damage someone else's work? No, my youngest child, you may not rip pieces off of my other son's toy to put onto your toy. That is just how we get a fight, right? And everybody's going to their room pretty soon. And does the design match the rest of the world? Is there some sort of synergy that makes this thing holistically make sense? That keeps our world building fairly coherent. But there's still a lot of freedom there. If it passes those 4 tests, as a rule, we permit it in whatever we're doing there. This creates a stunning level of freedom and diversity. Those 4 rules are not that much, okay? And it tends to result in creations that last well past the end of playtime. We have stuff that our kids have been working on, they've been learning, building, and growing, some of which are now multiple years old, where they've been working and expanding it. Ironically, these same principles that work when it comes to harmonious play within my home work really well in my work at HSLDA Action to a degree too. In the same way I encourage my kids to create something worth preserving, HSLDA Action, works to preserve and expand homeschool freedom. Now, just a couple things. Let me see if I can, maybe? Oh yeah. We'll get to this, sorry. We'll leave it there for a second, but I'll get to this in a minute, okay? With the recent surge in homeschooling, which, let's face it, COVID was the best single thing for waking people up to what happened in education in America, homeschooling rapidly expanded, okay? In fact, home education in America tripled, okay? Fastest growing segment of education, if you want to call it that, okay? Now, has there been a tide receding? Yeah, a little bit, but the new tide lines are quite a bit higher. Even with the end of COVID and people going back to school, homeschooling is still running at about double or a little more what it used to be, okay? That's a lot. In fact, you're seeing people start to panic about it when it comes to funding public education because they get their funding by pupil. There aren't as many pupils, okay? They went somewhere else, and people are talking about how kids are lost. No, actually, they've been found. In fact, they've been found somewhere other than in your box. The big box school approach is suffering in that regard because of dollars. Honestly, because a lot of those dollars don't actually go to the kid. They go to fund something else, and that thing still wants money. That aside, we get a lot of questions about why HSLDA is involved in national politics. How does that apply to homeschool freedom? And our answer is the same. In order to maintain and build on progress in educational freedom, we have to continue to engage in the political area. That means we work with people with a lot of diverse backgrounds, a broad variety of cultures, a range of political viewpoints. Sometimes that means that we specialize in working with people that specialize in working with special needs communities or military families, inner city groups, it's rural associations. It doesn't matter who the people are if we agree on the principles. Wherever we find them, we work to ally with people who are dedicated to educational freedom, supporting families, and ensuring parents are in the driver's seat when it comes to the well-being of their children. Now, I know a lot of you probably feel reasonably repelled by the current state of American politics and American education, but I don't need to convince you that it's important to engage in both. If you're here, you understand that already. Now, like the 4 principles I use when building with my kids, there are 4 principles that underlie homeschool freedom. They're obviously a tad different than the principles for Legos and Minecraft, but they're equally vital. They're limited government, religious freedom, parental rights, and educational freedom. That's how we build a free society of education when it comes to America. Each of them is intrinsically linked to the freedom that we enjoy. And if any of them are removed, our freedom becomes imperiled. Think of them as stacked. One built on top of the next, or pillars holding up a roof. But limited government is the foundation. Homeschool freedom, at least in the case of homeschoolers, being the pinnacle. So let's start with the biggest and most foundational idea. And honestly, this is something that feels like it needs to be said a lot more recently than it used to. But government only has the powers allowed by the Constitution. Traces that back to the Magna Carta in England, if not further. But the principle is simple. The government does not get to do something just because it is the government. It's only allowed to act if it has permission, even when that is inconvenient or inefficient. And such permission comes from our elected officials and occasionally the people they appoint. Why is that relevant to us as homeschooling? Okay? Well, it's how we restrain our government from doing whatever the heck it wants. We saw this in great display during COVID. The government chose what it needed to do and just did stuff, whether it had authority or not. This happened in my small town. When the emergencies were declared and things went in, we pulled out the books and said, what does the law say for an emergency? And the answer was, do whatever you want. Oh, that was not a good idea. That was not a good idea. In fact, there needs to be restraints put in place. So I actually helped author the law that defined what they could and couldn't do. Okay? And a sunset clause to make sure it turns off. You know, those are good things. Those are necessary things. When it comes to homeschooling, those same issues apply. Okay? The government does not get to do it just because it wants to. And although most people in America 20 years back would go, of course, in the last 5 years, that idea has taken a severe body blow in modern society. The government said it. Okay, that's the thing. No, just because someone in the government said the thing does not mean it is in fact law or right. Okay? They have to have a source for that authority. And that is something that we, holistically as homeschoolers, fervently fight on. We call it the battle for the front door. The government does not get to go through your front door just because it thinks it wants to. Okay? For homeschoolers, that's crucial. Okay? But that applies much broader in society. So you'll see homeschooling engage on limited government issues because the broad impact of that down the river, it affects not just us, but everyone else. Okay? That brings us to the second principle we work on, and that is parental rights. Okay? We talk a lot about parental rights at homeschooling. I mean, Corey worked for the Parental Rights Organization, which HSLDA helped found years ago. Okay? This may seem a bit unusual for homeschoolers when we're focused on children, but the logic is simple and straightforward. History, research, and experience all show us that parents are the people most dedicated to a child's success, education, and well-being. There are, of course, unique exceptions. But parents are consistently the ones who make the best choice for their kids. Again, that might seem obvious, but common sense is, as they say, not all that common anymore. And that's why we repeat it and why we support the parents' rights to direct the education and care of their children. Which brings us to the third tier of our construction project, okay? Religious freedom. Now, of course, not everyone is in homeschooling for religious reasons, okay? In fact, there's plenty of people that are in the conservative movement that are not engaged for primarily religious motivations. Many are, some are not. That's fine. But homeschooling has been a place of refuge for many families who found that traditional education promotes values and ideology that conflicts with their own. The truth is that attacks on religious freedom often lead to efforts that can undermine general freedom as well, homeschool freedom included. It is often assumed that religious freedom only matters to religious people. But the preservation of religious liberty benefits the whole of the increasingly diverse community that we call America, and, frankly, the conservative movement. It's foundational under that idea of limited government, which brings us to the last principle, educational freedom. Supporting educational freedom means recognizing that each family and each child is, in fact, unique. That is something our box schools struggle with. Although they can say it, the way they functionally put that out is hard. What works for one child may not work for another. What one family prioritizes, another may not. This was particularly true for me growing up. When I was growing up being homeschooled, we had very limited options for homeschool curriculum. There were 4, maybe 5. If you were talking math, there were 3. The one my mom picked was called Saxon Math. I abhor Saxon Math. I truly hate it. I wept over a dining room table that I now have in my living room, okay? Now, I can't count the number of math curriculums there are. And when my oldest was working his way through 7th grade, and he was like, I can't make not 7th grade, 5th grade. He's like, I can't make this math work. My wife and I looked at each other and said, okay, we'll find a different way to teach you. We went through like 12 math curriculums in like 6 weeks, trying different things. And then we found it, and math worked, okay? That level of iterative customization is almost impossible for a large structured organization. Okay? Even an IEP is going to really struggle to do that level of hyper-customization for a kid. But here's the thing. My son is not bad at math. He's actually pretty good at math. But he was really bad at learning the way that math was taught. Or that math was bad at teaching the way he thought. Call it however you want. The customization and the unique precision that was able to be targeted to him made it so that so math worked for him. All 3 of my boys use different math curriculum. There's 2 different English curriculums running around, okay? I don't even know what they're doing. Like, they have custom made their curriculum for geography and spelling and for languages and other stuff. And they thrive in that. But even our homeschool friends down the street use a different set. We have some points of commonality, and we'll get together, we call them co-ops. And other places, we don't. But that educational freedom and that hyper-customization that inherently comes from putting parents in the driver's seat of their kids' education results in far better education than you get when you put them in a box. The unique values, culture, skills, and abilities of our kids have to be paired with the unique talents, abilities, and opportunities each family brings, which means you have to customize the education not just to the kid, but to the person delivering it. Can the parent or the teacher or the aide or whatever deliver this in the format the kid needs? That transit method is core, which means the more you try to systematize it and put it into a factory format, the harder that's going to be, and the kids are the ones that suffer. Mass-produced education is rarely capable of adapting to the individual needs of each student, and educational freedom is the only thing that can provide the opportunity for each child to receive the best education possible. Now, I've had the privilege of watching my boys grow, flourish, and hone their sense of creativity, and they've gone from creating haphazard creations to building long-lasting creations. I don't think we can zoom in on this, probably not. Sorry, I didn't think about it. But on the picture we have on the screen right now, if you look at the bottom of that lower picture, anyone recognize it? Very good. Very good. Helm's Deep, okay? They have recreated digitally, with basically digital Legos, okay, the Helm's Deep Fortress from Lord of the Rings, okay? And if you get your way in there, you can find the horn of Helm Hammerhand, stashed away in one of the corners and building up the towers. You can see the caves where they hid the women and children when the orcs attack. You can see, the Hornburg and the different things that are going to be there. And yes, you expand that world out and there's a lot more to it. Okay? We've got another one where they took a piece of English literature and started building out this castle from a story we read, and now there's passages, and there's hidden caves, and there's libraries, and there's amazing discoveries that they have built and hidden in these magnificent creations. Didn't start that way. It started as chaos. What it turned into was beauty. But it required some rules of how we work together, and then a lot of freedom underneath those common rules. But one of those involved that respect and recognizing that there was going to be some self-driving there. In some places, stories from books spring to life. Others flourish with entirely original concepts, including, in one of those things, dinosaur cavalry. My youngest is thrilled with this idea. Okay, cool. Doesn't apply to all the worlds? That's fine. Their imaginations are employed, and then all of a sudden, math, engineering, science. The amount of math involved in making either one of those things, by the way, the top thing you see on that picture is made of Legos. Okay? It's a little hard to do that. But that is actually one large Lego creation. The back of that is black Legos. That's how they make it float, okay? Yeah, okay. There's a few people realizing how hard that is, okay? The amount of math that goes into that sort of play where you're calculating how far, how much, et cetera, what sort of pieces I need, is the sort of practical work where you take these ideas you're learning theoretically and put them into practical reality. And suddenly the education you're learning becomes tangible. You can do that with homeschooling, which is what makes it a stunningly effective method of education. And the best part is, when they're doing something like this, they don't know they're learning. And that makes it significantly easier, okay? But they're all in evidence. And all of a sudden, I have found scraps of paper where my boys are doing math, where they're calculating out ratios, and they're trying to figure out how many things we need to build the thing. And I'm like, there's the thing we taught you last week on a scrap piece of paper in the basement. Not that they're ever admitting to mom or dad that they used what they learned. But we're watching it when they don't know it, and we're seeing the fruits of that succeed. In my own way, I get to apply some of those principles then that we teach to our kids in my work at HSLDA to help ensure that other children get the same chance my boys have and that I had growing up. And it gives us a privilege to help build a world where all the individual and creativity of home education that it can inspire can thrive. And so we work to keep those foundations strong because they secure a path forward for children to flourish. If you want more information about what we do, about HSLDA Action, you can go to hsldaaction.org. You guys can email me. I think the very last slide has my email on it. I kind of skimmed through this because the clicker wasn't working well and I go back and forth. But that is kind of what we do and why we do it and how important it is and frankly how incredibly impactful home education is. I wanted to save a little bit of time for some Q&A if people were interested in that. So I know I'm just watching the clock here, so I'm going to kind of curb my remarks there. But can we open it up to Q&A and then we'll go from there? Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I've got a hand in the back. Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Please wait until you have the microphone to ask your question.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Joel. My name is Harry Modinger. I'm with the Arlington GOP, and I'm curious if your members or alums have any interest in running for school boards, because we're looking for 2 candidates here in Arlington.
Arlington may not be the most politically friendly territory for freedom-oriented, non-public education people. However, homeschoolers have this odd habit of having parents who work in public education. There is a stunning number of parents who are public school educators who homeschool their own kids, which tells you something. There was a couple years ago, there was a superintendent of public instruction for one of the states who was a homeschool mom. Because at this point, what they needed was mom to go in and clean up the mess, okay? Not a professional administrator. As far as kids running for office, they do it all the time. We've got homeschool graduates running for office all across the United States. In fact, for a long time, the youngest serving lawmaker in Indiana was one of our alumni. They've got a new one. He got older, but he was that for a long time. I don't have an easy lead for you in Arlington, but I know we've got homeschool communities of people that are engaged there. I don't know if you're going to get if they're highly electable in the current climate you've got there. But oh, of course. Morton definitely gets to ask.
What would you say is the biggest roadblock today for homeschoolers, like either politically or just with the school system locally? What's the biggest roadblock for parents transitioning into taking their kids and schooling them at home?
Knowledge and confidence. 2 things.
Okay.
Knowledge being, what are the resources available? There's an army of lawyers that will beat the ever-living daylights out of the school district director who's trying to get in their way. But if you don't know that, that's intimidating. Okay? okay? They're happy to do it. There's a stunning level of resources. There are foundations that provide millions of dollars of assistance for curriculum and content for parents. There is honestly more information than they know what to go through, and so trying to find good curriculums to start up, it's not a question of finding a curriculum, it's figuring out which one to use. So there's a knowledge component to that. In some cases it's too much knowledge, so you can't find the really important things just because the internet gives you everything. So that's one part of it. The other part is the confidence. They're like, I'm not a trained educator. I'm not, I'm really going to be the kid that can get my kid ready for college. Yes, you probably are, statistically speaking. The scores for homeschoolers are, 80th, 90th percentile on average, okay? Remember, keep in mind, average 50% is your public school standard. Okay, that's your flat line, and we are well above that, okay? So in that regard, yes, statistically speaking, you are more than capable. There was a research project done in Kansas several years ago. They were looking at a 3rd grade and 4th grade class, and they said, okay, average class, a little above average. They were coming in at like the 55 to 60 percentile, so a little above average. And they said, okay, how much of an entire day from 8:30 to 3:30 do they spend in education? And so they followed these kids for a year and a half to say how much educational time per day do they receive. Take a guess how many minutes in a school day was educational content. I heard 30, I heard 5. It was a little better than that. 83. 83 minutes a day was how much time in a normal public school that was better than average was actual delivery of educational content to a kid. Which means you can probably homeschool your kid and be done with school by 10. Homeschoolers do it. The reason we're still in our pajamas is because we got our school done before it was time to leave the house, okay? Now, does that happen automatically and instantly? No, it doesn't. Okay? You do it in community. Homeschooling, like anything else, is done with friends. You don't do it entirely on your own. So, like Lone Rangering homeschooling is dangerous. People think they have to. That's not. We're not trying to get you rid of your community. We're trying to free you. Okay? In fact, we want to give you community. So those are kind of the things that I would think that most people run into they need. If you've got special needs or other stuff, there's a stunning amount of help for people that are working with kids like that. And frankly, it's a lot better than you're going to see in most of the public institutions. But confidence is a part of that. All right. Sorry, Morton.
I have 2 grandkids who've grown up in Culpeper, and their parents have entirely homeschooled them.
There you go.
Okay. I have 2 grandkids. They've grown up in Culpeper, Virginia, and their parents have entirely homeschooled them. My 16-year-old grandson is still in homeschool high school. My 18-year-old granddaughter graduated last year from homeschool high school, and she is now completing her freshman year of college at, God help her, UCLA.
Oh, wow. We go where people need us? Okay.
But as I understand it, in Virginia, every young person is required by law to take a test, no matter how they are educated, public school, private school, homeschool. And I've had reports about the percentiles that my 2 grandkids are there. My question is, you gave some numbers just now, but comparing the numbers in terms of the percentile of average percentile of homeschoolers versus other categories of training, could you give us some more about that? First, is the state test a useful test that produces results that are going to be helpful? But the question is, can you give us some numbers about the percentile scoring of homeschoolers versus other types of schools?
I can give you some, but there's some big caveats I got to give you first. Homeschoolers don't like government tests, because to pass a government test, you have to run a government curriculum. Okay? And kind of the point of homeschooling is that we don't. In fact, we don't take your money, we don't take your regs, and we don't take you as the person to be authoritative over our kids and our kids' education. The better way to measure it is probably looking at what you see for their college acceptance rates, what you see for their career prospects, etc. And what we find really funny is the really high-end education institutions in the US are eager, if not gleeful, to get their hands on homeschool students. Okay. Why? UCLA. Harvard, Yale, Columbia, which may not be good things, but like they're looking at it and saying, if you're looking at academic achievement, homeschoolers are excellent. Where you find problems are in the guilds. For example, the cosmetology schools, like the one you have to go through to get a permit to braid hair, they really don't like homeschooling. I don't know why, but they've been fighting us for 20 years. There are other institutions, like if you're doing background checks and you want to work in like unionized entities, they are not fans. But that's not really about the quality of their education, is it? It's about control. When it comes to the testing numbers, in Virginia, Morton, I think your information is slightly out of date. There are 3 different methods that you can homeschool in Virginia. One of them requires the test, but not all 3. Okay? So any test data I'm going to give you is going to be regulated to a specific subsection. I don't have the Virginia numbers on me offhand. We did do some national surveying a couple years ago, but that is pre-COVID numbers, and so I'd like to get you more updated ones. We're in the middle of doing some additional analysis right now. What we were seeing on average was that homeschoolers were coming in, in the top 25%, depending on where it was and the kids in the background. We have some numbers that put them in the top 10 to 15%. Some of them in the top 5, depending on where you go and how you do the numbers. So that sort of quality, okay, gets demonstrated, but because homeschoolers don't take public money, and we make that a pretty firm line, it also means we're not having to justify how we spend that money, what we do, to lawmakers. Because believe it or not, we don't think the government is the source of education. And we also don't think that they're necessarily the best person to validate that. If you've driven on the roads, you recognize the DMV is not exactly the best source of justifying whether you should be a driver or not. But nonetheless, that's where we all go get our license. Okay? In the same thing with homeschooling, we're like, maybe teaching to the government test, which produces such excellent outcomes, is not where we want to go. I was actually just up in New Hampshire testifying against a bill. It was they call them EFAs there, which is basically a government voucher to be able to take money from the government to use it for home education. We're not big fans of that at HSLDA for a variety of reasons. They were trying to get some accountability for the people who took that public money, not homeschooling. The way they wrote the law was all non-public education, which swept a bunch of homeschoolers into it and tried to make them take the state testing. And then if the state testing was doing well, they were going to use that to justify additional public school funding. Like, you are literally mooching off homeschoolers' academic success to justify additional dollars for public school. The author of the bill did not appreciate that observation in the testimony, and she did not appreciate the fact that 500 people showed up to testify against it, and she was the only person testifying in favor of her bill. A week later, she made the motion to kill her own bill. So that stopped, but there's a significant assumption within the public education policy space that government needs to be the person to tell you whether you're doing a good job or not in educating your kids. And we would say that statistically speaking, but more accurately if you look at employment and market strategies, that is not in fact true. They're not even that good at evaluating their own projects. What was Reagan's quote? The closest thing you get to immortality is a government program. Like, they just keep going, right? Like, it's like, well, why do we think you're going to actually evaluate something and correct it? You haven't managed to fix public education in I don't know how long. So that's a long answer to a short question. We don't have those sorts of data like that. We have some, but they are little snap points around the country. There's not one big overarching thing, because we're not a big fan of government databases and massive testing projects, mostly because people then use those to target people. And so we tend to be pretty privacy-oriented folk as a result. Sorry. Oh, we got a couple more. We'll do the 2 at the back, and then Bob, you'll get the last word. Does that work? Because I will have to run. I apologize.
Thank you. There's no doubt that homeschooling in the aggregate is more successful than public education. When I was 18 and voting for the first time in the New England town meeting, I was still a senior in high school and voted to defund the school system.
I approve.
And that is still my view today. I'm in my 60s. But just because it works in the majority of cases, there are scofflaw parents and parents who are just too incompetent to educate their children, those who are too busy and slipshod and so forth. What guardrail would you recommend against that infrequent circumstance?
Sure. A good question, an honest one that we've dealt with a fair bit over the last 20 years. There's a couple things. First, we have been working with a group that is looking at essentially child abuse prevention across the United States, because frankly, that's a horrific thing. Now, it happens more often in a public school than in a homeschool, but nonetheless, it happens because people, I would say, are sinners and thus broken, and there is bad that can exist anywhere. I was at a conference last year. We were looking at a long-term, like a 10-year study that this group had been doing. Their group's out of Seattle. I don't remember the name offhand. And they said that educational neglect was always a trailing cause of child abuse. And what they meant by that was that something else went wrong first. Okay? Educational neglect, which is what homeschoolers would usually be the trigger thing, they said, honestly, and then, by the way, this was a liberal group. This was not a friendly group. This was a left-leaning group. They're like, honestly, we should take it off the list of things that we screen for child abuse, because if you found that, you've missed something 5 years upstream. Okay? There's a much bigger issue, and we should take and focus our attention on the key indicators of a failed family that are broader than education by a lot. Okay? And they happen earlier. Education is downstream of that. Okay? You target your intervention efforts there. Because if you do that, you're going to get the problems, okay? The education neglect is a downstream issue. It's never just that. In fact, they looked at 20 years of data and they could not find a single case where the only thing was an educational neglect issue. It was always downstream. So I would say if you want to address those issues, you address them upstream of home education, upstream of any educational choice, okay? And in that regard, you still have to comply with compulsory education law in every state, okay? And provide whatever evidence the state requires of that. And all of the CPS issues, the public reporting, et cetera, those are all still binding and applicable. And they generally work, except when people go and take it kind of on a crusade in some odd direction. That being said, I will frankly acknowledge the fact that people are broken. And thus, no system, no matter how perfect you can make it, is going to have stuff that goes through the cracks. And that's a tragic reality that is, in fact, tragic. It's not an excuse. But I would say that character always trumps systems. You have someone of bad character, and they will get around any system you make. Because a system is just a system. And the creativity that exists in the human mind, for good or for ill, can overcome almost any system that exists. And that is, unfortunately, also true when it comes to evil. It requires people of good character. And, frankly, to a point earlier we made, community. One of the things that we fervently encourage is that homeschoolers homeschool not as lone rangers, but in community. Because when you're in community, when you're with other people that you interact with on a regular basis, you see when something's off. And then the question is, are you going to act as a responsible party, or are you going to be the typical modern social person who puts their head down and says, that's not my problem? No, you step in. Why? Because we genuinely care for our fellow man. Okay? That is where you're going to solve 96% of what's going to come into your box there. There will be some things that we just never can get to, but honestly, the level of government overreach and control that would get to that very edge of that bell curve would be an intolerable society to live in. Sir.
Joel, thank you so much for speaking to my personal pain with Saxon math. As a homeschooler, I had to work through that as well.
My great desire is to put it on a bonfire, sail it out in the middle of the place, and burn the entire thing down. My mom said no, it was too expensive of a book. She had to sell it back. But oh my gosh, yes, I feel you so much.
But also, often I've heard different forms of arguments that have come up against why you should not homeschool. One of them being, in my personal case, well, you don't get a whole lot of social interaction between other fellow students, which is not at all the case.
That is the height of stupidity and uninformed. Yeah.
So what are some of those arguments that you have encountered during your time, and what are some of those counter arguments against those?
So I think my favorite one is still the socialization argument. Okay? Because people make it all the time, and generally it is someone who is uninformed and unreflective. So if you've made it, I'm sorry, I just judged you badly. But that being said, here's the short version of it. If you think that homeschoolers are unsocialized, what you have is a broken form of an understanding of what socialization is. There are two types of socialization. There's horizontal socialization, okay? Which is basically, can I interact with people that are my same age, same peer, same culture? You get a lot of that in the public box school, right? Okay. 7th graders are great at interacting with other 7th graders. They wish they were 8th graders, they look down on 6th graders. Ugh. Okay? Right? That's how it works. Homeschoolers don't have enough other 7th graders around them. Homeschool families may be large, but there's that 9-month cycle that kind of staggers what the age distance is. There's like over-enthusiastic parent-teacher conferences, and that's how you get large families, okay? At least in homeschoolers, okay? If you're doing that somewhere else, it's a problem, but in homeschooling, it's cool, okay? That being said, what you get, yeah, I did make that joke, it was fun. You can do it with homeschooling, it's the only place where it's okay. But what you get with homeschoolers is you get that horizontal socialization, and admittedly maybe slightly less flexible than your public school equivalent. But what you get is you suddenly realize that socialization is not a left-right paradigm or horizontal paradigm. It is in fact a circle. Okay? And as you rotate that around, you realize that proper socialization is not just with my peers, but it is with people older than me and younger than me. Because when you walk into the workforce, when you walk into LI, the age spectrum at LI goes from donor to 18, right? And donor is basically almost dead. So you get your spectrum, right? Okay. Sorry, I got that joke from LI when they were doing my donor training here. But they said, understand it ranges from a bequest down to I just graduated high school. And if you're going to be competent in society, you need to be able to work up and down that age range as much as left and right. And what our current educational system does is it just teaches left to right. It does not teach up and down. And one of the things that we find consistently from employers, they're like, I love homeschoolers. They can work with the little kids that come in the front door. We get this on Capitol Hill all the time. The parents that come in with a family, and all of a sudden the homeschool kid is like, oh yeah, and they're sitting there on the floor playing with the kids and totally comfortable doing with it. And then they turn around and they're talking to Senator so-and-so, and they're great doing that too. They work with boomers, they work with millennials, they work with Gen X, they work with across the spectrum. And they are actually fluid socially, up, down, left, right. They're comfortable with it. And that is actually one of the defining marks that home education brings that almost every other educational system does not provide. And it is actually one of its strengths, but people think it's a weakness. Last one. Bob, I think you had your hand up. He's coming.
You talked earlier about 12 curriculums and such. Who is creating those curriculums? I have 2 questions, but that's the first one.
There's about 1,000 companies that make curriculum now. In fact, for a long time when we started homeschooling, you couldn't buy curriculum on Amazon because they worried people would use it to cheat. They would get the answer key. Kids would buy the answer keys. Like, maybe, but then they discovered there was a huge market and they could make a ton of money if they sold a curriculum. Now you can get it anywhere. So there is a stunning number of companies and organizations, including individual moms and dads, who will make curriculum and put it up for sale. So the curriculum, I couldn't give you a list of how many. There's far too many now.
You talked about the importance of focusing on individuals. Have you tried any AI approaches yet to working with the curriculum so that it can focus on the individual strengths and weaknesses?
There is a group that is specializing in that. I think they're based out of North Carolina that's working on AI when it comes to home education. I have not followed them closely. AI is, let's just say, homeschoolers tend to be fairly privacy-oriented folks, so they're a little skeptical of AI. If you ask AI a year ago, if the content that it makes for you is yours or its, AI would tell you it was yours. If you asked them 6 months ago, they'd say it's complicated. If you asked them yesterday, they said it's mine. Okay? So the question then becomes, who owns the data and what are you doing with it? So there's a lot of stuff that needs to kind of be maybe legally fleshed out a little more before I think it's going to be broadly done. But there are people playing with it. So, all right. Thank you so much. Morton, thank you so much for the invitation.
Hold on here.
Oh, I will.
Well, thank you very much. That was a spirited and fact-filled presentation. Appreciate your coming. Let me present to you a Leadership Institute Adam Smith tie, which, as you probably know, was worn every day by Milton Friedman, worn every day in the Reagan White House by Ed Meese, club tie of the Reagan Alumni Association, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you so much.
Morton, I have wanted one of these since you talked about it in 2007, so I'm so grateful for that. Thank you.
Well, let me remind you that the Adam Smith ties are available online at the Leadership Institute website. Well, I invite you all to join us on June 5th, which will be our next Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. I encourage you to RSVP online at leadershipinstitute.org/breakfast. Now, will Kevin Tober and Spencer Johnson step up here? Okay. I invite anyone interested in a tour of our Stephen P.J. Wood building here and our Emerson and Dolores Reinsch Center for Campus Reform. Kevin and Spencer will be happy to give you a great tour of the Leadership Institute. They'll take you in two groups and tour you all through. And they'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And if they happen not to be able to answer a tough question, then they'll pop up to my office and ask me. Maybe I can help. We wish every mother a happy Mother's Day next week on May 12th. If you would like to purchase an Adam Smith scarf for a loved one, Kevin and Spencer will bring you to my secretary's desk up on the 5th floor. So thank you everyone for your attendance and for your continued support.